What's up, YouTube? So I know I've shown a few of these backlog videos recently, showing some of like the testing process with Shadow Immortality. This is more up to date. This is current list I've been working on with 4 Orcish Bowmasters. Rest of the main deck pretty stock. The Shadow Immortalities I've really liked: Murktide, Wraith, Shadow, Push, Thoughtseize, Counterspell, Drown, blah 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 blah. Nothing too exciting. I did cut the 20th land, kind of wanted to try it out with only 19. Cut the Odawara so I could keep the double blue in case I needed counterspell through Blood Moon. But I wanted to cut one of the non-black sources because with Shadow of Mortality, Bowmaster, Drown and Lock, Shadow Thoughtseize, stuff like that, you do want double black pretty consistently. And then Turok out of the sideboard. But in the sideboard, I was trying out Stern Scolding a little bit. I did not draw the card nearly as much as I wanted to in the testing process. So I'm probably going to try it out again, but I've been kind of like messing around with some sideboard slots here and there. Haven't found anything that I'm hugely interested in changing at the moment, but it's a work in progress. It's one step at a time. You will notice in the main, I do have an Underground River. I have been liking that a lot as an additional untapped blue-black source. Pairs fairly well with Shadow and Shadow of Mortality. But anyway, on the play, round one, got a Wraith, got to consider, Summon it all, a bunch of stuff. If our opponent's got like a Ragavan, hopefully we can find a second land to Bowmaster. Misty makes me think Misty No Companion makes me think like Living End, and based off the Street Wraith, I'm assuming that's probably going to be the case. Ditch the Murktide because I want to find lands more than I want to threat at the moment. At least if I find lands, I can fight over Living Ends. So there were two or three times this match where my opponent kind of like aggressively fetched in response to me fetching or something like that. And I'm kind of wondering if people are running around with Shadow of Doubt or something. Or if there's a case that like stifle effects like defragmentize, tails in, things like that are a little more popular. But let's get back to the match. They go for the grief. Of course, they always have the grief. So we counter that so they can't see that our hand is just chock full of counter spells. That means we do get to counter the Living End off this Shardless Agent. Pick up a Shadow. We've got multiple counter spells sitting up. So they go for this Violent Outburst here. We get to counter that. And we're just kind of cruising now. If our opponent cycles a bunch, we get Bowmaster triggers. If they don't cycle a bunch, then we're just going to chill. I kind of figured they would block one of these 1/1s and I'd get to ping down, but they didn't. I could go for the... it's important to know the math here. Like, I could go for the Flash in Bowmaster to get the extra 2 points in combat, the 1 point from the ping, the 1 point from the army growing. It doesn't actually matter because if I flash in the Bowmaster at the end of my opponent's turn, then I get to ping them down to 10, grow the Orc army to 2, and that gives me 10 power on board, plus I still have Drown and Lock. And if I don't present lethal to my opponent, then there's a reasonable chance that they'll just take game actions like this that don't actually matter, and I get to kind of guarantee lethal off that. Now I don't have to worry about, Violent Outburst on my upkeep because my opponent made game actions. I assume if they had Violent Outburst, they would have cast it, but if my opponent had gone for like an actual draw cycler instead of land cyclers, I'd probably flash in the Bowmaster. But anyway, on to game number 2, sideboarding against Living End, just like spot removal coming out, bringing in any extra counter spells, Grave Hate, stuff like that. Double Thoughtseize. They do have a Shardless Agent and a Force of Negation. good Thoughtseize, but it's very, very awkward if they top deck a Cascade spell, because then I can't hold up my counter magic. But if I just go to my turn, then I can Thoughtseize and hold up counter magic. Since my opponent didn't play out a red source, I don't have to respect Violent Outburst here, which is why I flash in the Orcish Bowmaster and go to my turn. And now it's just like kind of free reign. I could play out a threat. I really just don't need to at the moment. With my opponent going for main phase cyclers, that means there's a good chance I'm going to get to untap, drop a threat, hold up counter magic. They do have a grief, and they just end up scooping to that because they know I'm going to have like a threat plus counter spell. So this is on to match number 2. On the play, but on the mulligan. But our mulligan hand's like pretty decent. We've got interaction, we've got threats. Need a counter spell or two. But opponent leading on Ragavan's phenomenal for us. Good fatal push, but I decide I'm going to hold on to this Bowmaster. It's like a little risky because if my opponent, say, has like a seasoned Pyromancer that they were going to cast on turn 3, and I go for the Bowmaster, kill the Ragavan here, then they're probably just going to kill my Bowmaster and get to play the Spiral on turn 3. Whereas if I had Fatal Pushed on turn 1 and held up Bowmaster on turn 2, then maybe like they don't do anything on turn 2 and I get to wait and Bowmaster on 3 or something. But I kind of want to get my dudes down. Decide I do not care about the Dolphy. At least not enough to counter it. Like, Dolphy's pretty whatever. I was expecting them to attack back with the grief, so I just have like a big attack in. But since they're just gonna like try to draw removal and such, that's kind of fine with me. Can't really attack me because then they'd be very, very close to not alive. Attack with the shadow because I don't want to be in a weird position to a Dolphy, or not a Dolphy, a Ragavan dash, and I don't need the extra 2 points of damage. So like all I got to do is protect the shadow, and since I found Stubborn Denial, now I absolutely get to protect the shadow, and yeah, nice. Sideboarding against Scam. I usually trim like 3 Thoughtseize, 3 Street Wraith, maybe a Drown if I just have more stuff I want to bring in. Boarding in a couple Turoks, extra copies of Dress Down, Unlicensed Hearse, pretty much anything like that. If you happen to be running Dolphy in the sideboard, boarding like Dolphy in over 4 Wraith or something is pretty good. So kept a 2-lander. Picking up the extra counter spell is nice, but actually picking up the extra black sources is nicer. So now I'm kind of like getting to where I can kick Turok on turn 4 on curve, which is really nice. Maybe there's an argument to just playing out the shadow this past turn. But kind of figure whatever. And then kick Turok means if they do have a removal spell for the Turok, then I just get like a 3-for-1 here, which is really cool. Let's go ahead and get the last card out of hand. I don't know what it would be that they wouldn't play, so land makes sense, but it's kind of free just to get it out of hand. Now we've got Spyro tokens to fight over, or Bowmaster. Sure. Don't particularly care much about Bowmaster. And with them playing Dolphy, they are just dead on board instead of going for the Spyro tokens. I think the Spyro tokens was the right play because you get 2 back this turn. You only have to block 1 threat. So you get 1 token left over. You get 2 more tokens next turn. plus the Bowmaster. So you're blocking for like 3 turns there. Give yourself a chance to top deck like a fatal push. But anyway, on to match number 3. Back-to-back scam opponents. So I played the odds here. Let's talk about this line a little bit. I thought seized and saw Fury, Spyro, Feign Death, Orcish Bowmaster, a couple lands, and decided to roll the dice and just take the Bowmaster in the hopes that my opponent would do exactly this. Exile the Seasoned Pyromancer to get the Fury down, because I know that I've got this Dismember sitting around, so I'm just going to be able to answer the Fury. But I honestly didn't think that they were going to go for the Fury after I thought Seize, because it's kind of like, hey, that's black stuff. That's probably pretty good at killing a Fury. But they did. So YOLO. All right. Finding the second land is huge there. Now we have the ability to kill off the Dauthi, or we can hold up a counter spell. Decide to just like go through their turn, drown and lock the Dauthi on the end step. I don't know either of their cards in hand, but I really just want to be in a position like this where I've got counter spell up. If they don't do anything, then I can like consider, look for lands. I can Bowmaster. Probably should have Bowmastered. Like if they Bowmastered back, I'd want to know that before I make a decision on consider. But as soon as I commit to consider, then I kind of hard commit to consider. So grief, pitch an Undying effect. So I'm assuming they have like one of their 2 cards in hand is another Undying effect. I could go for Thoughtseize, but I don't want it to just be like dead in the water to a lightning bolt, which I wouldn't be shocked if they had a bolt right here, because I haven't given them a target to bolt, and then I'm not dead to bolt. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that that could be it. So I don't want to cycle the Wraith, go for the Thoughtseize. Like, I could go for Thoughtseize, and if they respond with Bolt, counterspell it. But I really don't want to be dead in the water to like their 3 drops. So here they evoke Fury, exiling a Blood Moon. I'm pretty positive their last card was an Undying effect. But since we get to just counter the Fury, we don't have to worry about the Blood Moon, don't have to worry about the Undying effect. And get to just go to game 2, just like the first. So, pass turn, plan on killing this Ragavan on our opponent's turn, because if they decide to go for an Undying effect, like I'm pretty happy with that. I get to untap, Thoughtseize, still have Dismember to deal with the Ragavan. Life is fine. Saving life here a little bit by going for the Dismember first, or the fetch Dismember first. Give opponent a chance to rip an Undying effect, and they did. So now I have to rip an answer to the grief, which we do, because, you know, there's justice in this world from time to time. So opponent's untapping 2 lands in a dream. We're untapping 2 lands in a dream. And it's just going to be a race to see who top decks better. Obviously, Shadow being a very good top deck for us. No big 3-drop like Seasoned Pyromancer for them is really nice. Last card, Lightning Bolt. I kind of figured it was like a Fury, but Lightning Bolt does make this Shadow a 2-turn clock, so they have like this turn to draw something relevant. And before Ragavan connects here, because obviously we can't do anything about it, I do want to point out that we are significantly better against Ragavan hits than a lot of other Death Shadow decks are. And a lot of that comes from the fact that like one Murktide Regent is one of our primary threats. So there's a pretty good chance that if they hit like a Murktide here, or if they hit a Shadow of Mortality, they can't cast either of those. So that's really cool. And then a huge chunk of our deck is just like Stubborn Denials, counter spells, dismembers, things like that, thought seizes, street wraiths. They just don't really do anything in these types of situations. Obviously, at the moment, we've boarded out some thought seizes and street wraiths, but against Ragavan in general, like a bunch of our cards just don't really do much. So just like here, opponent hits a counter spell. Obviously, they could have hit a drown, and that looks significantly worse for us, but they didn't. So it didn't. Match number 4 on the play against Platinum Angel. Hope that's not foreshadowing. So they multiply. We see Endurance, Kiora, Ephemerate. So some sort of like blink pile. When you see Ephemerate, then you know there's like Solitudes in the deck and stuff like that. I could not for the life of me figure out the Kiora part of it, because Kiora says if a creature power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. But like Solitude and Endurance are all 3 power, and I'm sure they're playing a bunch of mana dorks that are 3 power. So I really don't know what the synergy is there. And let me double check. Yeah, so Kiora is whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. So I don't really know like what the combo there is. I'm assuming there's something. Like you don't play Kiora without a reason to play Kiora. Maybe it's time for us to play Sultai Shadow with Kiora. Just like turn 3, Kiora, untap a land, play a shadow, draw a card. Kiora, untap, hold up mana for Stubborn Denial, or the turn after, like play a Tarmogoyf, untap, play a Tarmogoyf, draw a card, untap a land, hold up stub. Maybe this is on to something. Maybe like we're just not cool with the tech. But anyway, sideboarding. Since I saw like Ephemerate, I kind of wanted to leave in Stubborn Denial to some extent. There's reasonable chance they're on like Prismatic Ending. But I also saw Kiora. So with Kiora and Ephemerate, like there's probably enough live targets for Stubborn Denial. If this was just straight creature blinking, then I would board out Stub. But oh boy, Veil of Summer. So fun. That's my don't you guys love playing against Veil of Summer voice? Isn't it such a fun card to interact with? Could play out the other Shadow, but I kind of think that not being able to hold up Stubborn Denial in this kind of situation is a pretty big deal. So they Endurance. Looks like they were just endurancing to Endurance, and we ran into the Veil of Summer. Silly us. But we do draw into the Dress Down. I feel like that's gonna be pretty decent. Looks like it's just gonna get us the one shot. Really, really nice. Drawing in the fetch land was nice too, because we would have held up Stub or been able to play out second Shadow. But I really don't want to play out second Shadow into a potential like Solitude Ephemerate situation. But just kind of weird how that match played out. On round 4, around 5, Blooming Marsh, the Lighted Halfling, no companion, almost assuredly Yawgmoth. Go ahead and kill the Halfling. Grist, never mind, not Yawgmoth. Viscerous here. So this is the Samwise cat oven combo. If you don't know the combo, use the new Samwise Gamgee. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, you make a food. So Samwise plus Cauldron Familiar plus a sack outlet lets you sack the Cauldron Familiar, or play the Cauldron Familiar with Samwise out, make a food, stack the Cauldron Familiar to your sack outlet, get it back by sacking your food, which when it enters makes a new food with Samwise, and just get to keep looping Cauldron Familiar that way. Surprisingly resilient combo in this deck. Looks a lot better as well when, like us, we're seeing a little more real estate than we would like. But being able to answer the grist is huge. Unfortunately, Delighted Halfling kind of makes it so that like we can't answer the next grist. Now I could hold up Bowmaster, or I could hold up Drown in the Loch and not do anything there, like counter the Bowmaster, pass the turn. But I really don't know what all's in my opponent's deck list. And I kind of don't want to risk them having something that I can't counter that's really going to swing the game like a grist. That's kind of why I decided to go ahead and kill the halfling while I could. Now, if I had known this was more of like collected company, Abzan company, than it is combo, then maybe I would have been a little bit less like excited about countering a halfling. Um, or not countering the halfling, killing the halfling. But at the moment, I kind of thought it's just like, all right, Abzan legendary stuff, the ring, grist, all that stuff. But uh, very, very bad matchup for us because one, they have Delighted Halfling, which is a horrendous card for us to have to deal with. Two, they've got like 4 main deck copies of Grist, which is again a horrendous card for us to deal with. Let me pause this because this is like one of the craziest games I've had in a minute. So Grist, potential for the ring, Delighted Halfling. In this case, Ranger Captain's pretty bad for us with counter spells and such. So they just have a ton of stuff that like shuts us down hard. But my opponent here has brought in Chalice of the Void. And I was kind of thinking like, there's no way they're going to chalice on one, right? While they're sitting here with Viscera Seer and Veil of Summer in hand, and the potential to draw like more one drops. But sure enough, they chalice on one, which our deck right now is significantly better against chalice on one than like your typical shadow list. The Ranger Captain's pretty good. So their draws were third land Ranger Captain. So unfortunately, we kind of have to hold up Counterspell in case they have fourth land for company here. If they don't, then we can flash in Bowmaster. We can like flash in Bowmaster anyway. Got Cauldron Familiar into the Chalice. I assume that's like for the most part fine with them because they don't need the Cauldron Familiar to resolve. If they make a food, they can get the Cauldron Familiar back without having to go through Chalice. But instead, we're gonna counterspell a company. We know our opponent's got the Veil of Summer in hand, the Cauldron Familiar in the yard, uh, a Viscera Seer in hand, and we're just gonna kind of hope we can close out the game before they draw something relevant. Our big counter targets right now would be like a Samwise Gamgee, another collected company, probably a Bowmaster. A main phase endurance. It's like, even though we're flooding out really bad, the fact that our opponent has locked themselves out with their own chalice is pretty nice. So, get to go to game 3. And this is like game 3 for the trophy. It's not a great opening hand. Like, opponent having turn 1 halfling all 3 games is pretty rough. But I kind of figure like the hand has Path of Peril. It's got Drown in the Lock. If our opponent is kind enough to put some stuff in their graveyard, then maybe we can Drown in the Lock something. Looks like they're holding up Company. I could sit here and hold up Counterspell, but then I'd just be holding up Counterspell from now until the end of time. This turn 3 double endurance beatdown plan is going to be a little bit rougher than I wish. But at least we get Samwise off the board. And that puts like another land in, or another card in the yard, so maybe we can kill the halfling. If they didn't go for Grist on turn 2 or 3, then I'm kind of assuming they didn't have it. Yeah, and it kind of looks like they don't have anything else in hand. Maybe considering cracking a food. Nope, Bowmaster. I think this is the spot that I really started messing up in. I think I should have just countered that Bowmaster. Fetch Shock to 8, Drown in the Lock the Bowmaster. And I could just have like a Shadow to block an Endurance. They could hit me down to 5, but then I have Shadow of Mortality plus hold up Counterspell. And I think that's way better for me than letting this Bowmaster resolve and losing a body on board. Because now, like, the Cauldron Familiar is kind of whatever. But now they get this attack in, and I have to fetch and shock to eat an endurance, but I end up taking 2 extra points there from the Bowmaster and the token that I didn't need to take. And so I would be going to either a board of them just having 2 endurance and a Cauldron Familiar, or if they still made the attack, 1 endurance, 1 Cauldron Familiar versus my Shadow Mortality, I'd still have Counterspell up, but I would be at 6 life instead of 4, which in the face of a Cauldron Familiar with a food token is surprisingly big deal. Like right now, my entire game plan is counter a sack outlet so that they can't Cauldron Familiar, get the Cauldron Familiar back, and try to run them out of food tokens as fast as I possibly can. But like here, I'm blocking. This was such a long tank on this turn. But I end up, I'll give you the spoiler, I end up drowning the locking the army token because my thought process is if my opponent hits me with the Cauldron Familiar and the Bowmaster, I go down to 1. I can attack back with the Shadow and the Shadow of Mortality. They have to crack the food to survive. But anything that makes a food, a second Cauldron Familiar, a Bowmaster, all just kill me from 1. So I kind of want to like drown the army token, put them down to 1 damage coming in, put myself to 2, so I'm not dead to second Familiar, to Bowmaster, whatever the case may be. And if I need to like untap and Path of Peril to clean up some small stuff, I can. But I figure if I take all the damage and I'm not actually killing them on the crackback, then taking the extra damage doesn't really accomplish anything because I have to block next turn. But they have second Cauldron Familiar, which kind of does it. But if I had countered the Bowmaster earlier, I would have saved myself, I think, 3 points of damage there. If they had made the same attacks, which they probably wouldn't have. So I'm probably saving myself more damage, which could lead me to a position where I don't have to. I'm still counterspelling the Court of Calling, but maybe it's a position where I can like set up attacking in, Path of Peril off all the small stuff. I lose my Shadow, but if they also lose like their Cauldron Familiars, then that's kind of a win for me. But yeah, not countering that Bowmaster just really, really, really bit me in the butt. Other than that, though, like, deck felt solid. Somebody in one of the Discords asked yesterday, like, what are the good and bad matchups for Shadow decks? And I really like stressing out the point, the same answer I gave in there, but emphasizing this point that it is pilot dependent. Like, I've had a bunch of people ask about Dimir and say, oh, I really struggle with like the scam matchup. But right there, we just 2-0'd scam twice. And obviously, there was like a one lucky top deck, a Dismember on a Grief in there. But for the most part, we weren't really behind in either of those matchups. So a lot of it just comes down to like the micro decisions that you make over the course of the match, which is why we also have the matchup guide series on YouTube. So if you are on the YouTube channel, you can find that and see like, oh, here's some tips and tricks and sideboarding and play patterns and things to help me fight against decks like Scam. I know that one's on there. But other than that, yeah, like Dimir thing's solid. If you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. Bowmaster's a reasonable addition. I don't think it's $140 worth of addition or 160, whatever the ticks are on it, but it's good. It's reasonable. But if budget is a concern for you, don't feel like the Bowmasters are going to buy you $160 worth of wins. Is the best way I can put that. It'll be a nice little value piece here and there, but it's not something that you should feel like you have to go invest in. But other than that, if you're enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, drop a like, drop a subscription. Let us know. Let me know down below what the next Shadow variants you really want to see are. I've got backlog leagues of like Jund and more Dimir and stuff like that to work through. Sultai. Got a link to the Twitch stream down below in case you want to check out a live stream, as well as the Twitter, which is the first place that we get update as soon as the stream does go live. So if you never want to miss one, make sure you're following on Twitter. Other than that, link to the deck list down below. And I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.